Welcome to our Safety, Health and Environment training. SHE stands for Safety, Health and Environment Training, which is the mandatory training regimen used by Habitat for Humanity Northumberland. SHE is the method of implementing safe procedures to ensure the safety of Habitat employees and volunteers. This training method is universally used across Canada for Habitat affiliates. Habitat is committed to providing a safe, healthy, and enjoyable experience for all of our workers on our build site and in the restore, and to ensure an accident-free workplace. The SHE policy can be found posted on all Habitat for Humanity Northumberland workplaces. The policy requires volunteers to report any hazards or incidents they may encounter to their supervisor. The 4 goals of the SHE program are recognition, assessment, and control of hazards in our workplace, the continuous education of our employees and volunteers, communication between management and the workforce through a SHE coordinator, leading by example. The ultimate goal of SHE at Habitat is to have 0 incidents. Every worker must think of safety and their responsibility. Shortcuts and unsafe acts of work practices are not acceptable. The Ontario Health and Safety Act legislates the rights of both employers and employees. It is the law that a copy of the Green Book, which legislates this Ontario Health and Safety Act, be available at all work sites. The Internal Responsibility System is a policy of the Ontario Health and Safety Act. It includes the Board of Directors, the Executive Director, the Supervisors, and all management within Habitat for Humanity Northumberland. The External Responsibility System is the Ministry of Labour, who can step in at any time on a build site or in the restore and find problems or look for safety precautions. Your responsibility as a worker and volunteer within Habitat for Humanity are:
work in compliance with the Ontario Health and Safety Act, SHE policies and procedures.
Wear protective equipment, clothing, and devices as required by your affiliate.
Work in a manner that does not endanger you or your coworkers.
Report any defective equipment, hazard, or violation of act to a supervisor.
Not to engage in horseplay or boisterous conduct.
Participate in all required SHE training.
Report to work in a fit condition.
Always be aware of your surroundings so that you are working in safe working conditions.
Report all injuries, accidents, and near-miss incidents immediately.
Follow first aid, medical treatment, and emergency response procedures.
Follow directions and warnings when handling hazardous materials.
Attend daily safety training, toolbox talks, and pay attention for new safety regulations.
When lifting heavy or awkward objects, always ask for help.
Make sure machine guards are present and in working order.
Ask questions. There is no such thing as a stupid question. Everyone will benefit from the answer.
Don't rush and be aware of your surroundings.
You have the right to refuse anything you are not comfortable with.
If you are not comfortable doing a job that you've been asked to do, you have the right to refuse that work. If someone enforces that you do the work and you are not comfortable, you are asked to report it to the supervisor. We want all of our volunteers to have a fun and safe experience. Bill C-45 is an amendment to the Criminal Code of Canada that took place as of March 2004. It establishes workplace negligence as a criminal offence across Canada. It affects federal, provincial, and municipal governments, corporations, private companies, charities, and non-governmental organizations. It establishes a legal duty for all persons directing the work of others to take reasonable steps to ensure the safety of workers and the public. This duty applies to directors, partners, supervisors, and workers of an organization. Any person who is directing the work of others. Charges of criminal negligence can result in significant fines for organizations and even jail time for negligent individuals. Workplace Violence and Harassment, Bill 168. An amendment as of June 2010 establishing the protection of workers from workplace violence and harassment as part of the Ontario Health and Safety Act. All workplaces are required to have a violence and harassment policy. Harassment can be defined as engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct against a worker that is ought known or ought reasonably to be known to be unwelcome, for example, bullying, intimidation, offensive jokes, or blackmailing. Violence can be defined as the exercise or attempt to exercise physical force against a worker that causes or could cause physical injury to a worker, or behavior that is reasonable for a worker to interpret as a threat to exercise physical force against a worker that could cause physical injury. Workplace Sexual Harassment, Bill 132. Bill 132 is an amendment to Bill 168. It is an act to amend various statutes with respect to sexual violence, sexual harassment, domestic violence, and related matters. It is engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct against a worker in a workplace because of sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, where the course of comment or the conduct is known or ought reasonably to be known to be unwelcome, or making a sexual solicitation or advance where the person making the solicitation or advance is in a position to confer, grant, or deny a benefit or advancement to the worker, and the person knows or ought reasonably to know that the solicitation or advance is unwelcome. Habitat for Humanity Northumberland is committed to providing a work environment where all individuals are treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. Workers and volunteers are encouraged to report incidences which will then be investigated by Habitat for Humanity Northumberland management. There is a zero tolerance policy for workplace violence and harassment.
Now we want to talk to you about general safe work practices. We use the 3 A's to help us avoid slips, trips, and falls, which are the most common incidents in the restore or on any of our Habitat construction sites. The first A is attitude. We want everyone to come to us with a willingness to work safely. The second one is awareness. You always need to be aware of what you're doing and how it affects the people around you. And finally, and most importantly, the third A is action. If you see something unsafe, or if there's something you're not sure about, ask. It's much easier for us if you help to prevent a hazard than if we have to deal with an accident. So here are several of our general safety rules. First of all, safe speed. Work at a safe speed. Never rush on the build site or in the restore because that's often when mistakes or injuries happen. And never run on the build site or in the restore. Secondly, learn. If you're given a task or something that you don't know how to do, ask your supervisor. You want to make sure that you learn how to do the task properly and safely. Number 3, tool guards. Make sure that all tool guards that are necessary are in place and working properly before you use any power tool. 4, handling and tampering. Only use tools and materials for the job that they're intended to be used for, and do not handle or tamper with any tools without speaking to a supervisor first. 5, horseplay. Do not engage in horseplay or any type of dangerous acts while working with Habitat. 6, tool conditions. Always make sure that the tool you are using is in good condition. If you notice anything wrong with the tool, make sure that you report it to your supervisor right away so that it is either fixed or removed from your work site. 7, certification. Some tools or systems, such as the fall arrest system, require certification for you to use them. Make sure that you ask if you think something needs to have certification before you use it, and do not use it if you don't have that. 8, lifting. Always use proper lifting technique, which is lifting with the knees, not with the back. And number 9, carrying loads. A lot of what you will be doing is moving materials and products around the restore or the build site, so it is critical that you carry a load properly. Always ask for help if something is too heavy for you to carry on your own, and always make sure that you're aware of what you're moving and what other people are doing around you. We appreciate your help in avoiding any type of SHE incident while on your workday.
Unsafe conditions can be defined as hazardous physical conditions or circumstances that could result in a SHE incident, such as not wearing a hard hat. It's imperative that every volunteer be able to identify and respond to unsafe work conditions in both the restore and on the build site. Some examples of unsafe conditions are improper protection from falls, unsafe or sloppy housekeeping that results in slips, trips, or falls, improper use, storage, or handling of materials or chemicals, improper electrical guards, illumination, or ventilation, and excessive noise exposure. If you see an unsafe activity or condition, stop it immediately if it is safe to do so. Warn others and then report it so it doesn't happen again. The Occupational Health and Safety Act, as well as Habitat for Humanity in Northumberland, have restrictions on workers working on certain jobs unless they have been trained to do so. If you're asked to do a job that is restricted, report to a supervisor. Some examples of restricted activities are working at 10 feet or higher above floor without protection, working in a confined area, or operating equipment or machinery you've not been trained on.
It is the law in Ontario that you must wear a Class E Type 2 hard hat and CSA-approved steel-toed construction boots when you're on our build site. It is also important that you wear eye protection whenever you're working with power tools. Habitat Northumberland enforces personal protective equipment, or PPE, that is mandated by the province of Ontario. We also encourage that you wear any personal protective equipment that you need to make yourself feel safe. If you are unsure of what you should be using, ask your supervisor. We have all the personal protective equipment on site, so if you need it, please use it. Safety boots must be worn on the build sites and in our restore. These protect your feet from slips, trips, and falls, as well as from stepping on any objects that would go up through your foot or anything falling onto your toes. Safety glasses must be worn when you're operating power saws or drills. These protect your eyes from objects that are flying, from gases, or from chemicals. Dust masks must be worn when fiberglass or sawdust are present. Dust masks make sure that you don't inhale any chemicals, dust, or any fibers that you don't want to inhale. Gloves must be worn whenever you are carrying or moving materials around the build site or in the restore. Gloves will protect your hand from burns, punctures, or cuts. Ear protection should be worn when you're exposed to prolonged loud noises or when you're working near any type of saw. Ear protection, such as these earplugs or earmuffs, will protect you from hearing loss. Here are a couple final tips when you're wearing personal protective equipment at your Habitat workplace. We want to make sure that you always inspect the equipment before you use it. We also want to make sure that you're wearing it properly, so hard hats, boots, everything is worn properly. Make sure that the PPE that you're using is in good condition. If you have concerns about the condition of the personal protective equipment that you've been offered, ask your supervisor. And finally, make sure that if there's training that you need to take in order to wear that personal protective equipment properly, that you make sure that your supervisor has provided you with that.
Personal fall protection equipment must be worn when you're working at 10 feet or above. Now you have to wear this if you're working on scaffolding or any sort of platform over this height. Because it is a specialty equipment, you must be trained in order to wear it properly. Where there's stairwells or openings to crawl space or basements, make sure there's adequate guardrails. Also, if you're on a second story and the walls aren't up yet, make sure there's adequate guardrails on that as well. Scaffolding, make sure that's tied off to the building, and you should have a fun and safe work day.
The next section that we want to talk to you about is health in your workplaces. When you get to either the Restore or Habitat build site, one of the first things you should do is make sure that you know who your supervisor is, the location of the first aid kit, the location of the emergency eye wash station, who the first aider on site is, as well as who is the SHE coordinator for Habitat. One hazard that it is likely you will face while working on a Habitat build site is heat stress illness. In order to avoid heat stress illness, it is so important that you stay hydrated and drink lots of water because you will sweat in the heat. It's also important that you wear the appropriate PPE for the heat, including a hard hat to block out the sun and loose-fitting clothing. Finally, it is critical that you wear sunscreen while working on our build site because sunburns can lead to more serious heat stress illnesses such as heat exhaustion or even heat stroke. Your Habitat build site will always have sunscreen for you to use. It is also possible that one of the hazards you might encounter while working on a Habitat build site is exposure to cold stress illnesses. One of the most important things when you're coming out to volunteer with Habitat is to make sure that you dress in layers so that you can change your body temperature depending on the weather. It's really important that you focus on your feet, your hands, your head, and your face. While you're working on the build site, it's really important that you take breaks because fatigue can actually inhibit your body's ability to retain warmth. Eat properly to make sure that your body has enough nutrients to endure the cold. And finally, if you're working in the really cold months, make sure that you cover your face and mouth to prevent the fluid in your lungs from freezing. In the event of an emergency, Habitat will always have a safe evacuation place for all of our volunteers and employees to meet. You will be told of where this location is on your first day when you're working. It is important that we maintain a clean and clear work site, especially on the build site, so that emergency crews can get access to any type of accident or scene as soon as possible.
Here are some tips on fire prevention and safety. Ensure proper storage of combustible materials. No open fires in any workplace. Have fire extinguishers on hand and attempt to extinguish the fire. Contact the supervisor and local emergency services. Evacuate all non-essential persons from the area. In the event of a chemical spill response, spills or unknown or unclassified chemicals require immediate evacuation. Do not go near or physically touch the spilled material. Report it immediately to the supervisor. Never clean up a spill on your own. Stay away from the area and make sure others don't enter the area.
Workplace Hazardous Material Information System, or WHMIS, protects workers by giving them the right to know about the hazards of materials and chemicals with which they work with, and provides the means to find out this information through labels, material safety data sheets, and work training education. If you have any questions about a material or chemical, especially the proper PPE that you should be wearing when handling the chemical, please ask your supervisor or check the material data information sheet. Please familiarize yourself with the following symbols: explosive, flammable, oxidizing, compressed gas, corrosive, toxic, health hazard, acute toxicity, environment, and biohazardous.
When we talk about working at heights, one of the most important things that we think of is ladder safety. When you're working with a ladder, the very first thing you have to do is inspect the ladder before you use it. You want to make sure that there's no oil or greasy substances. You want to make sure that it's got safe and working spreaders. You want to make sure that there are functional safety feet, that there are no loose nuts or bolts, and you want to make sure that the ladder is in good condition. If a ladder is in bad condition, do not climb it. Go see your supervisor and make sure that they are aware of your concerns so that that ladder can either be fixed, removed from the site, or the supervisor can decide what to do with it. When you are working with electrical currents present, you do not want to be using a metal ladder. A fiberglass ladder is the best option. When you climb and descend a ladder, you always want to face the ladder and you hold on to it with both hands as you climb or descend it. Ladders should only be used for short duration work, and you always want to make sure that you maintain 3 points of contact when you are working on a ladder. What that means is 2 feet and 1 hand, or both hands and 1 foot as you come back down. When working with step ladders, one of the most important things that you must make sure you do is never step past the second rung from the top. You always stay below there. Also, whenever you're going to climb a step ladder, you always want to make sure that these spreaders have been locked in place and firm before you climb it. When you're working on a step ladder and you're in a doorway or in a walkway, always make sure that you've found a way to barricade the door or the walkway so that no one can come through and run into you on your ladder. That's dangerous for them and dangerous for you. And finally, when you are working on a step ladder, and we've all done this, if the work has moved out of the zone that you're working in, instead of reaching, don't overreach. Move the ladder over so that you're staying within your work zone. When working with extension ladders or straight ladders, one of the most important things is that they're set up on the right angle. What we call this is the 4-to-1. So basically what it means is for every 4 feet of height, we want to be 1 foot away from the wall. A really nice little test that you can do on the build site that I do all the time is you can put your feet at the bottom of the ladder. If you stick your hands out, if your hands are just touching that ladder, that indicates a 4-to-1. and is a nice little check to make sure that that ladder is safe to climb. When you're using an extension ladder as an access point, never climb it unless it is tied off. And when you're working off of an extension ladder, you should never step higher than the third rung from the top. However, extension ladders are really only to be used for access or short duration work. If you need to be at a height for longer periods of time, why don't we go take a look at the scaffolding? We use scaffolding when we have to be working at heights for long periods of time. The most important thing when you are working on scaffolding is that it has been set up properly and that it is on a secure base. It is for this reason that we ask that you do not set up or take down scaffolding without approval from the supervisor. This process is important and we want to make sure that it's done properly. So you always need to have permission before you put it up or before it comes down. When you're working on scaffolding, do not allow tools or material or debris to accumulate on the scaffolding planks. Trip hazards are bad enough on the ground. We don't want them at heights where there are even more dire consequences if you trip. So the most important thing is to make sure that you've given yourself a tool belt and a proper place to put your tools and materials so that you can't trip over them while you're working on the scaffolding.
Certain equipment and machinery, such as a forklift, can only be used by trained personnel. A forklift cannot be used in the restore during public hours. If a forklift is present on the build site, stay clear of its path and make sure that the operator is aware of your presence. Always think and plan ahead when carrying loads. Ask yourself, what kind of material is this? What PPE do I need? Always carry a balanced load. Make sure that you're aware of your surroundings. If the load starts to fall, let it fall and warn others that it's falling. Always get help with heavy or awkward loads and make sure that you use basic lifting principles. For hand and power tools, always disconnect when moving, repairing, or changing the blades on power tools. Use tools only for their intended purpose. Wear proper PPE, eye protection and ear protection when operating the tool. If you've never used a specific tool before, ask for proper instruction. We encourage people to learn new skills, but we want you to learn the proper way. Always inspect tools before use and never use defective tools. Look for visible damage on hand tools and inspect power equipment for damaged cords, broken guards, etc. Be aware of working with any tools that run on electricity. Be aware of the area around you and clear it of any other volunteers if you think they might be in hazard.
Thank you for completing Habitat for Humanity's SHE training. We hope that all of our volunteers have an enjoyable and fun experience both on our job site and in the restore. Over the next few minutes, you will be required to complete a quiz. This finalizes your training with Habitat for Humanity Northumberland.